This is a message for the one they thought they buried. They plotted your end, scheduled your funeral in their minds, and set a court date they were sure you would never live to see. They fully expected you to be a ghost by now, a faint memory spoken of with pity. They didn't just hope for your silence. They prayed for your disappearance, banking on the lie that the dead tell no tales. But they made a fatal error. They miscalculated the power source you were plugged into. They forgot that when you have a God connection, divine protection has better aim than their lawyers, and resurrection has the final word. They wanted a ghost, but what they're about to get is the glory of God walking into the room in your shoes. You are the living proof that their entire plan has failed, and this is not just a court date. It is their judgment day. 1. They wielded the legal system as a weapon, not a path to justice. From the very moment they invoked the law, it was an act of aggression, not a quest for truth. This was never about finding fairness. It was about seizing control and orchestrating your destruction under the guise of procedure. They didn't run to the courthouse seeking justice. They ran there seeking a weapon, a state-sanctioned tool to accomplish what their personal malice could not: your complete and utter annihilation. They filed motions and documents not because their case was righteous or their claims were valid, but because they believed their lies would sound more credible when wrapped in legal jargon and stamped by a clerk. They cloaked themselves in the title of plaintiff or complainant, assuming it would automatically cast them as the victim and you as the villain. They envisioned the system as their personal sword and shield. The sword would be the endless paperwork, the crippling legal fees, and the soul-crushing delays designed to bleed you dry financially, emotionally, and spiritually. The shield would be the courtroom itself, a formal stage where they could perform their curated victimhood, shedding false tears, and presenting a fiction so polished they believed it would be mistaken for fact. Their entire strategy was predicated on the assumption that you wouldn't survive long enough to mount a defense. They planned for your absence. They expected the trauma they inflicted to shatter your voice, the shame they manufactured to choke your confidence, and the pressure of it all to make you implode. They were counting on you being a no-show, either physically gone or so mentally and emotionally broken that you would be incapable of coherent thought. In their perfect scenario, the judge would simply rubber stamp their version of events. Their lies would become official record, and your name would be permanently stained without you ever speaking a word in your own defense. The legal system was never the objective. It was the theater for your execution. They needed a grand stage to perform their lies, a place where their manufactured outrage could be legitimized. What they never, ever factored into their dark equation was the part of you that refuses to die. They did not account for the spirit within you that awakens with righteous fury after betrayal, that finds strength in the ashes of character assassination, and that chooses to stand even when its hands are shaking and its knees are weak. They arrogantly assumed that time was their ally, that with each passing day, you would decay. They couldn't have been more wrong. They failed to understand that the God you serve uses time not to bury truth, but to prepare the voice that will declare it. While they were using the law as a cover for their evil, God was using the time to forge your voice into a weapon of truth. Now, as the day approaches, you are not just alive. You are alert, aware, and armed with a clarity that terrifies them. The courtroom they intended as a slaughterhouse is about to become a battlefield, and they are horrified to realize you didn't just show up. You came prepared to flip the entire script. They never thought you'd have receipts. They never imagined you'd be standing with a straight back, peace in your eyes, and the undeniable glow of someone who has walked through hell and came back with the keys. 2. This was a psychological assassination, not just a lawsuit. Understand this with chilling clarity. The papers they filed were merely a symptom. The real war was never meant to be fought in a courtroom. It was waged against your mind, your spirit, and your sanity. This was a meticulously planned psychological assassination. Their primary goal wasn't a favorable verdict. It was your complete internal collapse long before a gavel ever sounded. They weren't trying to win a case. They were trying to dismantle a person. They wanted to see you so consumed by paranoia, so drained of all life force, so emotionally wrecked that by the time any official proceeding began, You'd be a hollowed-out shell of your former self, too broken to fight, too tired to speak, too confused to even remember the truth. They used fear as their primary poison, administering it in slow, deliberate doses. It came in the form of quiet threats veiled as concerns, subtle manipulations that made you question your own reality, and a relentless, suffocating pressure campaign from all angles. They didn't need to come at you with physical knives when they could use the far sharper blades of doubt, shame, isolation, and silence. They labored to fill your mind with a constant stream of worst-case scenarios, painting vivid pictures of your ruin until you felt the walls of your own life closing in. They wanted you to believe that no one would ever believe you, that speaking up would only make things exponentially worse, that you were already defeated and just didn't know it yet. Every action was a calculated trap designed to provoke a reaction they could then use against you. Every setup was engineered to create emotional chaos, pushing you to the edge so they could turn to others and say, "See, I told you they were unstable." They desperately needed you to self-destruct. They didn't need you to die a physical death if they could just kill the part of you that had the strength to fight. They needed the warrior in you to disappear. They banked on you spiraling into depression, crashing from the anxiety, and being too psychologically damaged to even show up when it mattered. But they grossly underestimated your depth in the battles you had already won in secret. They had no knowledge of the silent wars you fought and conquered within your own heart long before they ever entered the picture. They didn't realize that your breaking point had already come and gone, and what rose from those ashes was not a weaker, fragile version of you, but a refined, fire-tested, and unbreakable one. So now, as the court date looms, they are not facing the fragile, fragmented person they tried to create. They are standing opposite the very person they accidentally made unstoppable. You aren't walking into that courtroom as a victim seeking pity. You are striding in with the piercing clarity they feared, the unshakable peace they tried to steal, and the formidable strength they never, ever saw coming. Their psychological warfare didn't just fail. It backfired spectacularly. It tempered you into steel. And now, the ones who are truly scared, the ones whose minds are unraveling, are them. 3. They banked on the system moving faster than your healing. Their strategy was built on speed and shock. They rushed everything, pushing for dates and deadlines, because their entire plan depended on you still being shattered when the day of reckoning arrived. They believed your trauma would be a permanent disability, keeping you frozen in a state of confusion, grief, and emotional paralysis. They weren't afraid of your voice itself. They were terrified of you finding your voice before they could legally cement your silence. That's why they moved in the shadows, sent documents at the most inconvenient times, and tried to overwhelm you with a flood of information and pressure. They did not want you to have a single moment to catch your breath, collect your thoughts, or connect with your own inner wisdom. They were gambling on time being on their side. They thought a swift, brutal assault would trap you in the initial shockwave of the attack, forcing you to operate from a place of raw fear and panic. They wanted to deal with you while you were still bleeding, still disoriented, still trying to make sense of the betrayal. But they made a critical miscalculation. They failed to understand the nature of divine healing. They thought your recovery would follow a predictable, linear path, a path they could easily outpace. What they didn't know is that your healing wasn't on a human timeline. It was on God's timeline. It didn't need a year or a month. It only needed a moment of divine alignment. You evolved faster than their lies could take root. While they were busy plotting their next move, smugly assuming you were still a wreck, God was quietly and miraculously putting you back together in private. They never expected you to cultivate such profound clarity, unshakable confidence, and deep-seated conviction in such a compressed window of time. They expected you to still be scattered, emotional, and reactive. Instead, you are emerging sharper, calmer, and more grounded than you have ever been in your life. They bet everything on your brokenness, but your healing came more swiftly than their sabotage. Now the tables have turned, and they are the ones who are nervous because the victim they thought they had cornered has been replaced by a warrior they do not recognize. They played a fast game, hoping to capitalize on you being at your lowest point. But you didn't just meet their pace. You leveled up and surpassed them. You didn't just recover, you matured. You didn't just weep, you studied. You didn't just survive, you prepared. And now, the very speed they tried to use to bury you is the same velocity at which their carefully constructed world is unraveling. They tried to sprint ahead of your healing, but your God connection gave you wings. You caught up, and you overtook them. You are walking into this next chapter not just aware, but fully awake. Not just ready, but utterly refined. They thought they owned the clock, but time has proven, once and for all, that it was always working for you. 4. They tried to make the calendar your executioner. They sought to weaponize time itself, to turn the steady march of the calendar into a ticking bomb strapped to your soul. Every delay, every rescheduled hearing, every prolonged period of silence was a deliberate piece of their strategy of attrition. They weren't just buying time. They were using it as a slow-acting poison, designed to erode your spirit piece by piece. They are masters of psychological torment and know intimately how emotional pressure compounds over time, especially when you're in a holding pattern, waiting for a monumental event like a court date. They use the calendar to methodically wear you down. In the gaps created by delays, they sowed chaos. They spread rumors, stirred up confusion, and made sure to reopen your deepest wounds at the most strategic moments, all while the clock ticked menacingly in the background. Their ultimate goal was for you to emotionally bleed out before the main event even began. They wanted each passing week to feel like another nail being hammered into your coffin, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. They were certain the waiting would extinguish your drive. They were convinced the sheer weight of the unknown would crush your spirit and break your back. They wanted you to arrive on the appointed day already defeated by the journey. But they fundamentally misunderstood the nature of a chosen one. While they were weaponizing time, you were training in it. You were not merely waiting. You were transforming. You were not passively enduring. You were actively preparing. Every vicious rumor they spread became fuel for your resolve. Every frustrating delay gifted you more precious time to gather evidence, strengthen your mind, and deepen your connection with God. While they were gleefully anticipating your breakdown, you were meticulously building an unshakable resilience. They foolishly mistook your strategic silence for deterioration, but in that quiet, you were sharpening your clarity to a razor's edge. They thought you were falling apart, when in reality, you were falling into perfect alignment with your divine purpose. They wanted you to lose the fight before it ever officially started, which is why they dragged things out, hoping the grueling process itself would be enough to crush you. But you didn't just endure it, you outlasted it. You remained steady through the crushing anxiety, the tormenting second-guessing, the insidious whispers, and the relentless mind games. And now, the date that is finally approaching is not the date of your execution. It is the date of their exposure. You didn't just survive their twisted timeline. You seized it and made it your own. The very time they tried to use to break you now stands as irrefutable proof of your endurance. They thought you would be buried by now. Instead, you're walking in with the kind of supernatural calm that sends absolute terror through the hearts of liars. They set the calendar to kill your spirit, but all it did was give God the time He needed to make you unstoppable. Before we go deeper into this powerful revelation, take a moment to solidify your spiritual foundation. If this message is resonating in your soul, confirming what God has already been whispering to you, then make your God connection official. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell. Your spirit requires consistent nourishment, not the chaos the world offers. And as we continue this journey together, if you feel called to support this ministry and help us keep this light shining brightly, please consider sowing a seed into this work. You can send a blessing through the Super Thanks button right below this video. A donation, even of $10, becomes a powerful weapon in this spiritual war, helping us to create more content like this and reach countless other souls who are in the exact same battle you are facing. Your support allows us to continue setting captives free. Now, let's continue with the truth they never wanted you to hear. 5. They thought a delayed court date meant a decomposed body. Let this sink into your spirit, because this is how dark and malevolent their intentions truly were. They believed that a delayed court date would ultimately mean a decomposed body. Their hopes were not merely set on a legal victory. They were banking on time and pressure to erase you from the face of the earth altogether. Their plan was not limited to silencing your voice in a courtroom. It was designed to ensure your name would only be spoken in the past tense. They desperately wanted people to remember you with a sigh of pity, not with a roar of power. They operated under the sinister assumption that the longer they could drag out the process, the higher the probability that you simply would not be around to defend yourself. For them, your physical disappearance was the cleanest, most efficient path to victory. No need to debate facts if the person holding the truth is no longer there. They wanted you to be erased quietly, without leaving any fingerprints. Their strategy was to let the pressure do the killing. Let the unending stress compromise your health. Let the crushing weight of it all silence you permanently. They were convinced that time would inevitably wear you down to a point where either your spirit would shatter completely or your physical body would finally give out. They were privately confident that grief, depression, chronic stress, or some other unfortunate event would take care of the problem of you. This wasn't just a passive hope, it was an active part of their design. This was the silent, cruel calculation behind every continuance, every delay, every tactic designed to prolong your agony. They didn't just want to see you lose the case. They wanted to read your obituary before the final papers were signed. But here is the glorious, heaven-sent plot twist that has thrown their entire world into chaos. You are still here. You are not just breathing, you are aware. You are not just surviving. You are prepared and ready for battle. While they were gambling on your funeral, God was building your endurance. While they were waiting for news of your demise, you were being divinely prepared for a direct confrontation. And now, when those courtroom doors finally swing open, the one person they were absolutely certain would be missing will be standing there in full form, calm, strong, fully conscious of their wicked plot, and yet utterly unshaken. They never in their wildest nightmares thought they would have to face you again, especially not a version of you that is alive and radiating strength. They will be forced to look you in the eye and watch you walk into that room as living, breathing proof that every single one of their evil expectations has failed. The very ones who planned for your silence will now be forced to sit in your powerful presence and answer for what they did. The court date they used as a deadline for your demise has now become the spotlight for their exposure. And when you walk in, it will not be with fear, but with the undeniable weight of truth behind every single step. While they shrink into the shame they so richly deserve, you will stand in the power they never knew you had. 6. They couldn't kill your spirit, so they tried to bury your character. When it became terrifyingly clear to them that their hopes for your physical disappearance were not materializing, they were forced to shift their tactics. Their strategy pivoted from physical annihilation to character assassination. If we can't take this person out of existence, they schemed, then we will erase them in the minds of others. This marked the beginning of a vicious, calculated campaign of slander and deceit. It was a war fought with whispers behind closed doors, with carefully crafted lies designed to sound plausible, and with the malicious twisting of facts. They began rewriting your story while you were too exhausted, too traumatized, and too busy fighting for your own survival to defend yourself. They created fictional versions of you, unstable, angry, bitter, dishonest, hoping that people would believe the fiction over the undeniable truth of your life. They didn't come at you with clenched fists. They came at you with rumors that cut like daggers. They planted seeds of doubt in the minds of people they knew you trusted, spreading just enough poison to make people question your integrity, but not so much that they themselves would look suspicious. Their methodology was insidious, and if anyone dared to ask too many questions or challenge their narrative, they had a prepared response. Oh, you know how they are. They're just unstable. They're so angry, so bitter. This was their master plan, to paint you as the source of the problem before you ever had a chance to speak your truth. They wanted your necessary silence, your time of healing, to be mistaken for an admission of guilt. They wanted your strategic distance to be interpreted as shame. But it backfired in the most spectacular way. Every false claim they made only served to shine a brighter light on their own dark motives. People, the ones who truly matter, the ones with discernment, started watching them more closely. Their stories began to unravel, filled with inconsistencies and contradictions, because your actual life, the way you continued to carry yourself, kept proving them wrong. They tried desperately to stain your name, but your God-given integrity refused to be tarnished. You kept showing up in the world with grace when they expected you to retaliate with fury. You remained calm and centered when they were doing everything in their power to provoke you into chaos. And because of your steadfastness, people started asking the right questions. Not about you, but about them. Your reputation didn't just survive their onslaught. It became stronger, refined by the fire of their lies. You became known as the one who didn't fold under pressure, the one who stayed true to their character when it would have been so much easier to get in the mud and fight dirty. You became more believable precisely because you didn't have to scream to be heard. The truth of your character stood tall and undeniable, even when your name was being dragged through the fire. And now, the very lies they thought would bury you have only served to expose how utterly terrified they are of what you represent. Incorruptible truth. They couldn't kill your soul, so they tried to kill your image. But what they failed to comprehend is that your reputation is not built on the shifting sands of public opinion. It is built on the solid rock of spiritual truth. And no lie, no smear campaign, and no amount of fake evidence can ever outlast that. 7. They forgot that resurrection always has the last word. They were so intensely focused on your downfall, so consumed with the vision of your ruin, that they never prepared for your comeback. They were blinded by their own hatred. In their arrogant minds, they believed that once they knocked you down, you would stay down, broken, and defeated. But you didn't just survive their attack, you resurrected. And resurrection is not about simply getting back up and returning to who you were before the fall. Resurrection is a complete and total transformation. It is about coming back stronger, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous to everything that tried to destroy you. You are not just alive, you are spiritually recharged. Every desperate prayer you whispered in the dead of night, every hot tear you cried in solitude, every single silent moment when your spirit screamed, "I quit," but your heart chose not to give up. All of it was building a reservoir of power within you. You were not healing in weakness. You were collecting holy fire. They foolishly looked at your silence and saw defeat, but it was a period of divine rebuilding. God Himself was your surgeon, stitching your soul back together with threads of gold while they were busy clinking glasses, celebrating what they thought was your final ending. You are now emotionally reinforced. The very tactics they used to try and break you now bounce off your spirit like pebbles off a fortress wall. The guilt they tried to heap upon you no longer grips you. The confusion they sowed no longer controls you. The fear they relied on as their primary weapon no longer paralyzes you. Your emotions are no longer their playground. Through this ordeal, you have gained the profound wisdom to understand what is yours to carry and what is simply their toxic projection. And you are now mentally weaponized. You see through the manipulative games that used to catch you off guard. Your spirit can smell manipulation a mile away, long before a single word is spoken. You no longer second-guess your God-given instincts. Your discernment has been sharpened into a lethal blade. Your thinking has evolved beyond mere reaction. You now respond with a piercing, unshakable clarity. That is the gift of resurrection, absolute power over confusion. So when you walk through those courtroom doors, you are not walking in as a wounded person, pathetically hoping for mercy. You are stepping in as a divine witness, a living testament to God's power. You are there not just to defend yourself, but to be the instrument that reveals the corrupt systems, the tangled web of lies, the spiritual corruption, and the hidden hands that operated in darkness, convinced they would never be seen. You are a living, breathing contradiction to every single thing they tried to bury. They forgot the most fundamental spiritual law. Resurrection rewrites the ending. And when God raises someone from the ashes, he never returns them empty-handed. You are not coming back for revenge. You are coming back with revelation. And that is infinitely more terrifying to them than anything they ever planned for. 8. Their whole plan was based on your funeral, not your testimony. The entire architecture of their wicked plan was built upon a single, foundational belief that you would never live to speak. They weren't meticulously preparing for a complex courtroom battle. They were confidently counting on a funeral. They never, for 1 second, imagined a scenario where you would still be here, alive, alert, and holding the very truth they tried so desperately to bury with you. This reveals the staggering boldness and darkness of their scheme. It wasn't just about silencing your voice for a season. It was about permanently erasing you from the equation, ensuring there would be no voice left to ever be heard. They were not planning to face you across a courtroom. They were hoping that the devastating damage they inflicted, the emotional, financial, and psychological trauma, would finish you off before any real confrontation could ever take place. This is why they played so dirty. This is why they moved like thieves in the shadows. This is why they told their lies with such arrogant confidence. Because in their minds, the story was already over. There would be no cross-examination. There would be no rebuttal. There would be no presentation of receipts. There would just be a closed case and a closed casket. Their entire strategy was built on your absence. But here you are, alive, whole, and worst of all for them, aware. You know exactly what happened. You know precisely what was done to you. And you know how they tried to rewrite the ending of your story, never expecting you to show up and correct the narrative in person. Now that the moment is finally here, it is not just a court date. It is a divine reckoning. You are not just present, you are profoundly prepared. And this is what terrifies them to their core. A survivor who lived to tell the tale. A survivor armed with memory, clarity, and undeniable evidence. Liars are only powerful when they can operate in silence and darkness. The very moment truth walks into the room, their entire theatrical performance begins to crumble and fall apart. That is why they are panicking right now. That is why the spiritual energy has shifted so dramatically. They are not afraid of the court system. They are petrified of you. You are the evidence they were certain would never exist. You are the voice they were sure they would never have to hear again. And now that you are standing in the very place they thought you would never reach, their lies are trembling on their lips. They scripted a tragic ending for you, not a dramatic confrontation. But now they are being forced to face something far worse than death, accountability. And that accountability is coming from the very person they tried with all their might to erase. Their plan was your funeral, but your presence has become the living proof that they failed. And the truth you carry is about to speak louder and more powerfully than every single lie they ever told. 9. They thought the court would hear one side, theirs. Their arrogance was their undoing. They approached this entire situation with the absolute conviction that the court would only ever hear one voice, their own. They built their entire case on the assumption that by the time the matter reached a courtroom, you would be long gone. If not physically dead, then at least so emotionally wrecked, so mentally scattered, that you would be incapable of forming a sentence, let alone mounting a defense. They were supremely confident that by dragging your name through the mud early and aggressively, they had already secured their victory. They believed your story couldn't possibly survive their campaign of sabotage. They were certain their version of events would stand forever uncontested because they never, ever expected you to recover, regroup, and rise with such terrifying clarity. They bet everything on your silence. This was the cornerstone of their strategy from day one. Their plan was simple. Discredit you behind closed doors, spread just enough plausible lies to make neutral parties take their side, and keep relentless pressure on you until you felt too weak and exhausted to even bother fighting back. And if that didn't work, their backup plan was that time, shame, or sheer mental exhaustion would eventually break you completely. Their goal wasn't just to dominate the narrative. It was to ensure you didn't have a narrative at all. But the fear that is gripping them now is palpable, and it is real. Because not only are you still standing, you are standing with a story that they have no power to silence. And it's not just an emotional plea. It is a fortress of truth, reinforced with evidence, patterns of behavior, motive, and crystal clear memory. You are not walking into that court with shaky words and fearful guesswork. You are stepping in with a bulletproof story, a narrative that was forged in the hottest fires of pain, but is now ready to be delivered with surgical precision. They never expected to be challenged, especially not by the person they worked so hard to erase. But now they are being forced to confront the horrifying reality that this is not a one-sided monologue. They will not be the only ones speaking. You have healed enough to see right through their cheap games. You have matured enough to remain calm and centered in the storm they created. And now your voice, the voice they once counted out and dismissed, is the very thing that is shaking their confidence to its foundations. The one variable they didn't plan for was your resurrection becoming your revelation. They never imagined that the same person they tried to destroy would be the one holding the missing half of the truth, the half that exposes them completely. They thought, at best, it would be your word against theirs, and they were confident they could shout louder. But now they see it's not your word against theirs. It is your unshakable truth, standing on a mountain of facts, against their tower of lies that is melting under the pressure of the light. They thought the court would only hear their side. But what's coming is not just your side. It is the real, unvarnished, and complete story. And it's about to echo with a power that will shatter everything they tried to fabricate. 10. They never planned for the possibility of your vindication. This is the thought that never once entered their minds. The possibility of your vindication was never a part of their dark equation. It was a variable they deemed so impossible that they didn't even bother to consider it. Their entire malicious strategy was constructed on the absolute certainty that you would disappear, quietly, shamefully, or permanently. They were convinced that the damage they inflicted was so severe, so total, that it was irreversible. They assumed you would either be too broken to speak, too terrified to show up, or too dead to matter. This is the reason they were so bold, so reckless with their lies. They never imagined that a day would come when they would be held accountable, because they never believed you would be standing there, strong, ready, and fully aware of every move they made behind closed doors. They weren't worried about crafting a plausible defense for themselves because they never believed they would have to. In their twisted narrative, this all ended with your silence, your absence, your complete collapse. And even when that didn't happen, even when you started to show signs of life and resilience, they stubbornly told themselves it was only a matter of time. They dismissed your rising strength as a temporary fluke, convincing themselves that you were still too unstable, too fragile to ever pose a real threat. They believed the truth you carried would remain forever buried under the mountains of exhaustion, fear, and trauma they had piled upon you. But now, the truth is rising with you, and it is rising stronger, clearer, and backed with a kind of inner power and divine authority that cannot be faked or manufactured. You are not only here, you are here with a divine purpose. You have outlived their dark expectations. You have outlasted all of their treacherous traps. And you have come through the consuming fire with your eyes wide open, seeing everything for what it truly is. What they were completely unprepared for was this version of you, the one who is grounded, unbothered, intelligent, and radiating a supernatural calm. You are not walking and looking for revenge. You are standing firmly for truth. And that truth is about to set off a chain reaction that will dismantle every single lie they stacked up like dominoes. It will happen one by one, cleanly, controlled, and unstoppably. They never planned for your vindication. They never saw a vision of you walking into a courtroom filled not with fear, but with dignity, facts, and a profound sense of peace. They never expected people to turn their heads and start listening to you. And they most certainly never prepared for the moment when their false narrative would crumble into dust in front of witnesses. You are the moment they spent all their energy trying to avoid. You are the reckoning they were too arrogant to see coming. You were supposed to be gone, but instead, you are more powerful than you have ever been. And every dark secret they thought they buried is coming back to the surface with you. The very thing they feared the most is happening right now. You are still here. And now, the truth is too. 11. They mistook your isolation for defeat. The moment you pulled back from the world to heal, they celebrated. They looked at your necessary season of quiet and declared it your surrender. In their minds, your isolation was irrefutable proof that they had won, that you had been broken, that you had no more fight left in you. They assumed everyone had walked away from you because you were guilty, weak, or had become irrelevant. To their shallow understanding, isolation always equals failure. They were incapable of comprehending the profound spiritual principle that when God removes every voice around you, it is not to punish you, it is to prepare you. You were not abandoned. You were being sharpened in the private chambers of the Almighty. They saw the silence surrounding you and misinterpreted it as the silence of the grave. What they couldn't see was the divine work happening behind those closed doors. You weren't just sitting in lonely solitude. You were healing at an accelerated rate. You were learning the enemy's tactics. You were studying patterns of abuse and manipulation. You were confronting your own pain head-on, building spiritual endurance, and learning how to move with power and precision without needing the validation of a crowd. They thought you were disconnected and lost, but you were actually being realigned with divine wisdom. You weren't losing attachments, you were gaining value. You weren't shedding power, you were shedding the illusions that kept you weak. They expected you to crumble without a constant stream of external validation. They foolishly thought you needed someone to speak for you, to defend you, to fight your battles. But instead, you became the one person they have no idea how to handle. Someone who is completely self-aware, deeply rooted in their own truth, and no longer driven by the need for anyone's approval. That kind of person is a terrifying threat, because when you are no longer moved by the noise of public opinion, you become immune to every lie spoken in your absence. You didn't fall off the map, you were pulled aside by God for a divine upgrade. And that sacred time alone completely rewired how you think, how you see, and how you respond. You emerged from that season of isolation sharper, quieter, and more dangerously focused than ever before. You no longer need a crowd to validate your experience. You don't need a cheering section to prove your value. Your strength now emanates from a deep, internal well that cannot be poisoned or manipulated by external forces. They mistook your strategic withdrawal as a final surrender, but it was actually the incubator for your rebirth. And now, they are looking at you with confusion and fear, realizing that the version of you that went silent is not the version they will be facing. You're not coming back loud and chaotic, you're coming back clear and precise. And that clarity is cutting through every false narrative they tried to build in your absence like a laser beam. What they arrogantly thought was your ending was, in fact, your ultimate upgrade. And now they have no idea how to handle the powerful being that solitude has turned you into. 12. They knew the truth would ruin them, so they tried to ruin you first. This is the key that unlocks their entire motive. They knew, with absolute certainty, that the unvarnished truth would utterly ruin them. So they launched a preemptive strike, moving with ferocious speed to ruin you first. This is why they came out swinging with wild accusations instead of humble apologies. They weren't trying to protect themselves from lies. They were desperately trying to get ahead of the truth. Everything they accused you of was nothing more than a strategic distraction, a cover story, a thick smokescreen designed to hide their own culpability. Deep down, they knew that if the real story ever saw the light of day, it would completely destroy everything they had built their lives on. Their carefully crafted image, their social influence, their status, and their sense of control. They had to flip the script before the script flipped on them. This explains the urgency, the volume, and the false confidence of their initial attack. It wasn't born from a place of righteousness. It was born from a place of pure, abject terror. They could not risk people finding out what really happened behind the scenes. So, their only option was to try and stain your name, to assassinate your character, before the truth had a chance to even take a breath. They needed to confuse the narrative immediately, to get people questioning your credibility before anyone had a chance to question theirs. They ran to the court not for justice, but for shelter, because they know that a courtroom, with its intimidating procedures and costs, can be used to scare, intimidate, and distract a target. But this appointment on the calendar is not just a legal date. It is something much bigger, something they cannot control. This is not just about your defense. It is about their complete and total exposure. A spiritual subpoena has been issued, and make no mistake, heaven has all the receipts. This moment is not just about what you did or didn't do. It is about shining a divine spotlight on everything they thought they had successfully buried. The lies, the manipulation, the setups, the fake concern, the abuse of power, all of it is now surfacing. And they are not panicking because you're fighting back. They are panicking because God is flipping the lights on in every dark corner of their lives. Every secret they weaponized against you is being dragged into the open. You are not walking into that court as someone desperately trying to clear their name. You are walking in as a living contradiction to every single lie they told, and they can feel the shift in their very bones. They feel that quiet, sinking dread that comes from knowing you are no longer in control of the story. Because now, the story is telling itself, and it is most certainly not on their side. They tried to ruin you to protect themselves, but truth is undefeated. And now, the very same courtroom they intended to use as their stage will become the scene of their public exposure. 13. They confuse delay with divine absence. In their profound spiritual blindness, they confused delay with divine absence. They looked at the silence, the apparent lack of immediate consequences for their actions, and they made a fatal assumption. They thought they had gotten away with it. The silence wasn't seen as a period of grace. They interpreted it as God's tacit approval. The lack of swift retribution became their permission slip to continue their wickedness. With every passing day that went by without exposure, they grew bolder, more arrogant. They started to genuinely believe that they were untouchable, that God was either too distant, too busy, or simply too distracted to deal with their case. But what their limited understanding could never grasp is that divine delay is not divine denial. It is divine strategy. God did not strike them down immediately because he was meticulously building a case that they could never, ever wiggle out of. He was patiently letting their own actions, their own words, their own wicked schemes become the irrefutable evidence against them. He was allowing time to reveal the patterns of their behavior that a single, isolated incident never could. The delay was not about giving them mercy. It was about making their eventual exposure so thorough and undeniable that no one could question it. Every lie they told, every scheme they ran, every cover-up they thought was so clever and successful, it was all being recorded quietly, thoroughly, and divinely. They mistook God's grace for weakness. They saw the lack of immediate consequences and thought they were in the clear. But they had no idea that God was strategically stacking the truth in layers, so that when the full revelation came, it wouldn't just look bad. It would be an open and shut case in the court of heaven. There would be no room for them to twist the narrative, no place to hide, no second version of the story for them to lean on. Now, the gavel of divine judgment is coming down, and it will not just be the legal system holding them accountable, it will be heaven itself. This judgment is not merely about who is right or wrong on a piece of paperwork. It is about what was done in the dark when they were absolutely convinced that no one was watching. The court date may look like a simple legal matter on the surface, but spiritually, it is a reckoning of epic proportions. God did not forget. God was not silent because he was gone. He was silent because he was preparing something far bigger and more comprehensive than they ever expected. Now, the very delay they relied on for their safety has become the perfectly constructed trap they walked right into. The time they thought was buying them safety was actually just digging the grave for their lies deeper and deeper. And now, judgment is not just about justice. It is about correction, revelation, and divine order being forcefully restored. The silence is over. And what comes next will not just hit their reputation. It will shake their very soul. 14. You're not just walking into court. You're walking into divine timing. Let this truth anchor your soul. You are not just walking into a sterile, man-made courtroom. You are stepping into a moment of kairos, a moment of divine timing that was carved out for you by the hand of God long before your enemies ever plotted against you. They looked at the calendar and picked this date, thinking it would mark your ultimate breaking point. They timed it like a hunter setting a trap, believing that by the time this moment arrived, You would be too weak to fight, too discouraged to speak, or too dead to even show up. But they forgot the most important rule of spiritual warfare. When you are chosen by God, heaven does not miss an appointment. Every single thing they designed for your destruction has been commandeered by God and repurposed as the stage for your glorious vindication. They wanted this moment to be your burial, but they catastrophically underestimated the God who specializes in resurrection. You are not walking in as a defendant, trembling and hoping for a good outcome. You are walking in as living, breathing proof that divine delays are never denials. They are strategic setups for something far greater than you can imagine. And what is about to unfold will be so exact, so perfectly orchestrated, so divinely timed, that even your enemies will be forced to hang their heads and admit that this was something far bigger than anything they could ever control. This is not just about a legal outcome. This is about divine orchestration. The strength you possess right now did not come overnight. It was forged in the lonely seasons when you were isolated, lied on, betrayed, and left for dead. While they smugly believed time was working in their favor, that same time was actually being used by God to heal you, train you, and prepare you to walk into this very day with supernatural clarity, unshakable courage, and holy fire in your eyes. They are expecting the old you to walk through those doors, the one they tried to sabotage, silence, and scare. But they have absolutely no idea who is about to walk into that courtroom. You are not the same person they tried to break. You are bolder. You are clearer. You are spiritually armored. And the very fact that you are still alive, still sane, and still standing is the loudest and most powerful testimony in the entire room. This court date doesn't belong to them anymore. It has been seized by heaven. It is not just a legal proceeding. It is a divine reversal. Every lie, every trap, every act of sabotage is being turned on its head right now. And you will not need to raise your voice, plead your case, or prove your worth. Your calm, powerful presence alone will speak volumes. This is divine timing, and you were born for it. They truly thought you wouldn't make it. They calculated your collapse, penciled in your expiration date, and scheduled this court date as if it were your funeral. But they forgot that you are not on their clock. You are on divine time, and heaven always shows up right when the enemy thinks the battle is over. Everything they did in secret is now rising to the surface. Every lie they whispered, every trap they set, every delay they manipulated. It is all collapsing under the sheer weight of truth. You didn't just survive their wicked schemes. You matured in the fire. You became dangerous in the silence. You didn't come to this court to beg for justice. You came to embody it. Your presence is a problem for them because it is living proof that they failed, not just to break you, but to bury you. You are a walking contradiction to their lies, a breathing interruption to their plans. And while they tremble and panic, desperately trying to hold their false narrative together, you will stand grounded in the one thing they can never manufacture: truth. This is more than a legal appointment. It is a spiritual unveiling. You are not walking into that courtroom alone. You are backed by every sleepless night, every prayer, every tear, and every divine delay that protected you from dangers you didn't even know were coming. And all of it has led you to this exact moment. So stand tall, chosen one. You are not arriving empty-handed. You come armed with evidence, both seen and unseen. You come as a living rebuke to every death wish, every character assassination, and every timeline that said you wouldn't be here. They expected a ghost. Instead, they got glory. This is divine reversal. This is spiritual justice. And it is your time. Don't just scroll away. If this message has struck a chord in your spirit, it's time to act. Subscribe to God Connection so you never miss another divine download. Your spirit deserves consistency, not chaos. Like this video to help the algorithm push it to someone else who is secretly hanging on by a thread, waiting for a sign. Comment below. Tell us the one line that shook you to your core or confirmed what heaven has already been whispering to you. Your testimony can be the key that unlocks someone else's breakthrough. Share this video with a fellow chosen one who needs to hear this. This might be the very message they have been fasting, crying, or praying for. And finally, if you are able to, consider supporting this mission with a donation through the Super Thanks button. This isn't just content, it's confirmation. It's spiritual warfare wrapped in wisdom. Let's keep waking up souls, shaking corrupt systems, and setting captives free together. God bless you.